Greetings, students of the Force, and welcome back to the Archives. Yavin 4 may just be about one of the most pivotal planets in galactic history, which is odd considering it is technically not a planet but a moon orbiting the gas giant of Yavin. But it is the namesake of the galactic dating system, which is BBY, or before the Battle of Yavin, or ABY for after. This is of course in reference to when the first Death Star was destroyed over the moon of Yavin, which became the focal point for the Star Wars timeline. But Yavin 4 itself had an extremely rich history before this event, dating all the way back to the days of the ancient Sith Empire. In today's video, we are going to be diving into the history, astronomy, and geology of the fourth moon of Yavin, as we continue to break down various planets across Star Wars lore. We will be starting with the earliest known records of Yavin, and ending with its battle. If you end up enjoying today's video enough to see a continuation of Yavin's history, as we document through Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order and beyond, be sure to comment that down below. Now my friends, let's begin. The Yavin star system itself was located in the Outer Rim, and was a part of the Gordian Reach, which was an archaic hyperlane run, one that most star charts actually failed to list, hence why the Rebellion used it so often under the Empire's nose and away from their watchful eye. Yavin 4 is the largest moon orbiting the gas giant of Yavin Prime. The moon is so large in fact, that it is about the size of a dwarf planet, and has a gravity comparable to Coruscant or Alderaan. 2/3 of the surface was just landmass divided into 4 major continents. These continents were mostly covered in a canopy of jungles, as Yavin 4 sported a tropical climate almost year-round. Dotting the landscape were also mountain peaks dominated by active volcanoes. The Yunte Mountains were the most famous of all of landmarks of Yavin, as they contained the Nicolo and the Burundi peaks. Both of these volcanoes is actually where Luke Skywalker's students would have gotten many of their lightsaber crystals. The history of Yavin 4 surrounds the ancient race known as the Massassi. For those of you who don't know, back in the old days of the galaxy, the Sith Empire was made up of a pure-blooded Sith species. They were red-toned people with an innate connection to the dark side, and their society had a vast strict caste system to it. A subspecies of the Sith people were a lesser developed kind called the Massassi. They were much larger than your average Sith Lord, and were described by Dark Jedi and Sorza's Sin as being nothing more than brute muscle animated by consciousness. They were not very intelligent, but they were incredibly strong, and were regarded as the finest warriors in the ancient Sith's culture. They often served the Dark Lords as slaves, while worshipping them as gods. One of these such Dark Lords where our story begins today is Naga Sadow. The year is 5000 BBY, and the conflict known as the Great Hyperspace War has now officially concluded. Naga Sadow waged a rushed and a sloppy war against the Republic, expending a great deal of the Sith Empire's resources, in an ultimately failed assault on Coruscant. Upon his retreat back to the Sith homeworld of Korriban, a rival from within was awaiting him there. The Republic and the Jedi fleets then arrived behind Naga, and he was caught in the crossfire of someone who had betrayed him and the power of the Republic. The Republic triumphed over the Sith Empire in the last battle, and would crush them definitively there. Naga Sadow, however, managed to fake his death in the battle, and limped away on a ship with a large group of his own Massassi slaves. They ended up on the opposite side of the entire galaxy, and would eventually land on the jungle moon of Yavin 4. Sadow had decided that this would be where he would make his new start, and so he ordered his slaves to construct large temples and mountains in his honor, monuments to his great glory. Under the Temple of Fire, he concealed the flagship that he had arrived in, calling it the Corsair. Sadow continued his studies of Sith alchemy here, learning how to assert his will on the natural order of the universe. His Sith Empire unmade, Sadow instead set his sights on creating a race of powerful warriors, those strong enough to protect what remained of his great legacy. Well, at least great to him. To this end, he experimented upon his slaves the Massassi, twisting and mutating them into powerful beings filled with violence and rage. Despite his abuse of them, the Massassi believed Naga Sadow to be their god, and worshipped him faithfully. Sadow experimented on the other creatures as well, including a larval space slug which had attached itself to the Corsair en route to Yavin. Not seeing any use for the beast after several unsuccessful attempts to tame it, Naga had decided to mutate it into a giant monster that could swallow a Jedi in a single bite. Now becoming what is known as a war worm, it continued to live deep under Naga Sadow's temple for hundreds of years. After decades of practicing his alchemy undisturbed, Naga Sadow decided that it was time to place himself in suspended animation. A special sarcophagus was made in order to keep his body alive for centuries, making a vow not to return until the fires of conflict had burned out, and a new apprentice had risen to bring about a golden age of the Sith Empire. The Massassi continued to keep up the temples and other sacrifices to their god, slowly becoming more and more primitive, just as they had been once, before the arrival of the Dark Jedi. And so the centuries would begin to wear on. The year would come in 4400 BBY, when the fallen Jedi Freedon Nadd arrived on Yavin 4. In accordance with their religious vow to defend the sacred temples of their master, the Massassi attacked Freedon at first, but the fallen Jedi repelled them with his use of the Force, dazzling them with his abilities. Accepting that he was the Sith that had been foretold, the now bestial Massassi took Freedon to where Naga Sadow rested. The fallen Jedi decided to wake the ancient Sith Lord, eager to learn the ways of the Sith firsthand. Naga accepted Freedon as his apprentice and began to teach him the ways of Sith sorcery. But as was the way of the Sith, Freedon took in everything that Naga had to teach him, and then he murdered him, taking at last the title of the Dark Lord. Freedon had no more interest in Yavin 4, and so he left it to go subjugate the world of more favor to him, the world of Onderon. Another 400 years would pass when yet another fallen Jedi would make their way to Yavin 4. This time, it was Exar Kun, the man that would change the world forever. Originally, Exar Kun had excavated the tomb of Freedon Nadd in search of an ancient Sith scroll. When he found instead, though, was a treacherous spirit of the Sith Lord himself, as the spirit of Freedon promised him knowledge, and the curious Exar Kun accepted. At first, Freedon had led Exar to Korriban, where the deceitful spirit had attempted to kill him twice, trying to forcefully make him embrace the dark side. But with each step further, and each attempt on his life, Exar Kun gave in to his anger and treaded further down the path of the dark side. Freedon Nadd decided to lead the young Jedi to a place where his journey with darkness itself began, the world of Yavin 4. Just like Freedon before him, Exar Kun was attacked by the Massassi, but this time, the tribal descendants captured the young Jedi, taking him deep into the temple to be sacrificed. Freedon Nadd had of course orchestrated the entire thing, but the Massassi priest believed that perhaps Exar Kun had been the true prophesied chosen one, the one that Naga Sadow had said would succeed him. Upon a statue, they placed the amulet of Naga Sadow, which was like a gauntlet that could channel the dark side of the Force into a singular, potent point. By chanting the incantation, the amulet summoned the war worm that Sadow had once failed to tame. Exar Kun, though, freed himself from his bondage, as the giant serpent broke through the ground of the temple to feed upon him. The tongue of the war worm wrapped itself around Exar and began to draw him into its jaws, squeezing the life force out of his body. And as he was about to die, the spirit of Freedon Nadd continued to prod him into the dark side, saying that he must give in, channel his rage through the amulet, that this was the only way. Exar Kun, full of hatred towards the spirit, finally let go of all of his Jedi training and completely lost all restraint. Embracing the dark side, he found that he could suddenly speak the ancient language of the Sith, and he called the amulet to his grasp. The artifact clamped itself down on his arm and multiplied his rage by 100,000 times. Now touching the raw energies of the dark side thanks to the amulet, Exar Kun was able to fire beams of pure energy, using it to slaughter the war worm and to end the ceremony of his death. Those that would not be conquered would be destroyed. Freedon believed that this was his own victory, and so he congratulated Exar Kun for what he had achieved. He then commanded the Sith Lord to go deep into Naga Sadow's lab so that they could work together on reviving Freedon back to flesh and blood. But Exar had other plans. Done with the spirit's constant goading, mockery, and tests, Exar Kun used the power of the amulet to destroy the spirit of Freedon Nadd once and for all. And as the new Dark Lord of the Sith, Exar Kun enslaved the Massassi and took over Yavin 4. He used his Massassi slaves to construct new temples, new palaces based on ancient Sith architecture designed to focus dark power in one location. The Massassi also uncovered the flagship of Naga Sadow beneath the ruins of the ancient temple, which the new Dark Lord Exar Kun now claimed as his own. Exar would go on to follow in Sadow's footsteps in alchemy, creating vicious Sith spawns such as battle hydras, Terminus, and night beasts. In one of his more bizarre and depraved experiments though, he created something called the Golden Globe, This was an orb of power that contained the spirits of the Massassi children. The purpose of the golden globe was unclear, but it radiated with power, and we believe that Exar utilized this as an energy source. Soon, Exar would ally himself with the Krath cult, the Mandalorians, as well as the fallen Jedi Ulic Qel-Droma, who now became his new apprentice. Exar would return to Ossus, where he recruited 20 other Jedi to his cause through lies and deceit about the Jedi. He told them that on Yavin 4 he had discovered ancient Jedi secrets that the Council did not want anyone to know. And upon returning to Yavin, Exar Kun gathered his Jedi brethren together and smashed a Sith holocron before them. The power contained within the holocron went into the minds of the 20 Jedi, corrupting their very essence and being. This now formed Exar Kun's Brotherhood of Sith, as he waged war with the Jedi and nearly destroyed them in totality. But the Jedi again managed to prevail, sending Exar Kun fleeing back to Yavin 4, where he prepared his greatest ritual. The redeemed Ulic Qel-Droma told the Jedi where to find Exar, and the entire order went there to put an end to his madness. However, Exar Kun had gathered all of his Massassi to the Great Temple, where he was now conducting said ritual. He drained all of their life energies, and drank it into himself with the intention of freeing his spirit from a mortal body and flesh. If that had happened, he would have ultimate power in the dark side, able to venture anywhere in the galaxy, with no one able to stop or hold him back. It would be Nomi Sunrider who would lead the entire Jedi Order into using a giant wall of Force light to put a stop to this awful ritual. By interrupting the ceremony midway, Exar Kun indeed had his spirit liberated from his body, but that was because he was also draining power from the temple itself. His spirit had become trapped within the walls, and for all eternity, Exar Kun was now a prisoner of his own design, alone, with no one able to hear his screams. He would forever be contained in that hell of darkness and silence. However, this would not be the last time that we know of Exar Kun in the lore, but that, my friends, is a story for a different day. During the great hunt that followed in the Great Sith War, the Jedi would cleanse Yavin 4 of all of the Terrentitekks and Sith beasts that Exar and his group had created. After this, they would delete Yavin 4 off of the wider records of the galaxy, hoping that the evil legacy of the world would be completely forgotten. However, despite the best efforts of the Jedi, the temples would once again be the site of another hideous Sith ritual. Several hundred years later, during the Great Galactic War, the reborn Darth Revan would attempt to use the ancient power of the temples to resurrect Emperor Vitiate. After 300 years as Vitiate's prisoner, Revan had been tortured so severely that his very spirit had been split into two halves, one light and one dark. The lighter half had passed on through the Force and left only Darth Revan behind. The Sith Lord was displeased that Vitiate had died before he could get his revenge, and so he had planned to resurrect the Emperor, just so that he could administer all the torture and pain that he had been subjected to. Darth Revan and the Revanite cult had completely taken over Yavin 4, prompting an uneasy alliance between the Jedi and Sith to finally bring an end to Revan. The Sith Empire at this time did not want Vitiate back either, believing that he was only a madman. So in a historic moment, the two opposing sides of the Force shook hands and put a stop to Revan's ritual. But they were only partially successful. Although they defeated the Revanite army and had interrupted the resurrection, Vitiate's spirit had been freed from chaos and was turned loose on the galaxy. The Emperor would fly to meet up with the other part of his spirit inhabiting Valkorion on the world of Zakul, igniting the Eternal Empire conflict. But Darth Revan would meet his own end here on Yavin 4, when the Jedi and Sith strike team both defeated him in combat. The light half of Revan came from the netherworld of the Force to deal with his own darker half, and force him to pass on. But as from this point forward, Yavin 4 would be largely forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, for thousands of years this time. Only a handful of people made journeys to the world between this point and the connection of the Clone Wars, mostly just treasure hunters. Though around 400 BBY, the Jedi by the name of Ikrit came to the moon and discovered the Golden Globe. However, he was unable to break the curse and to free the countless trapped Massassi children. This was because only a powerful Force-sensitive child could break the curse without destroying the spirits inside, a final insult from Exar. Rightfully, Master Ikrit left the Golden Globe behind and waited for someone to break the curse. Some archaeologists would also come to the Massassi ruins and unearth a bas relief depicting the Great Hyperspace War and a Sith chalice as well. both of which would end up in the possession of none other than Emperor Palpatine. What's fascinating though, is Sidious actually didn't show a lot of interest in Yavin at all. If he had tried, we believe that he would have found something really worthwhile and dangerous, but for reasons that we cannot find. Either Palpatine didn't know where Yavin was, or he didn't very much care for it. The next time the planet was seen is in the modern era of Star Wars and the Clone Wars, when Anakin had one of his very first duels with Asajj Ventress. After a surprise attack on the world of Moonalist, Anakin had chased the assassin down to Yavin 4. She had killed his contingent of clone troopers, prompting a rage within the young Chosen one that led to a scrappy duel. The two battled throughout the jungle and even made their way into the Massassi temples, continuing their duel to the very top of the structures. The dark energies of the world, combined with the rage that Ventress provoked within Anakin, drove him to give in to his anger and to fight with animalistic savagery. He beat down Ventress on the roof of one of the temples and knocked her off into a deep chasm, presumably, at least to Anakin, ending her life there. Following a roar of victory, Anakin would leave Yavin 4 behind and put the entire event out of his mind. And now at long last, in the year 1 BBY, Yavin would be rediscovered by a pilot who was scouting for a new location for the rebel base. The rebellion had just been forced to leave Dantooine after the Empire had found them, and they were now making their base out of one of the Massassi temples on Yavin. In fact, after a lot of research into the history of Yavin, the rebellion began to refer to Yavin 4 as the Massassi base in their coded transmissions. Perhaps if Palpatine had actually been paying attention to the rebel threat much sooner, he would have been able to easily decipher their location just off of the name alone. But since he wasn't involved, the Imperials had absolutely no idea where the Massassi base was, despite how frequently they heard it in rebel transmissions. Eventually though, they gained a few miscellaneous leads of the rebel presence could be in the Yavin system. So following the destruction of Alderaan, they sent a contingent of stormtroopers to confirm the rebel base's location. This event is what launched the Battle of Yavin, as Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader took the Death Star to the Yavin system in what may have been the Alliance's final hour. But as we know, Luke Skywalker was also present and made the 1 in a billion shot, which rocked the entire galaxy and proved that the Empire was not immortal. And so, fellow students of the Force, this was the history of Yavin leading all the way up to the destruction of the first Death Star. Once again, if you are invested in Yavin's story continued after this, please comment it down below and we can make a 2-part to this video. But until then, leave your thoughts on the history of this seemingly insignificant moon down below, one that turned out to be one of the most pivotal in galactic history. As always, thank you so much for joining us in the archives here today, and I hope you're having an absolutely incredible one.